Hello and welcome to the Kuyumunga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Kuyumunga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution we recognize to thrive, we must take an open approach. So we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration, and that's why we call it Conversation for Exploration. And on these weekly Sunday discussions, we have a full spectrum of topics from the arts to the sciences and everything in between. You're welcome to visit our website at kuyumungainstitute.com, and all of our presentations are free. And as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we thank you, the community members, who continue to support the mission of the Kuyumunga Institute. Today, we're honored to have two scholars who are willing to tackle the big questions that face us as humanity: the spiritual and technological connection between human beings and the environment. You know, there's so much attention nowadays to the world of self-development, but individual enlightenment's not going to solve climate change, world hunger, or the pandemic. Our consciousness is not isolated on the individual level. It extends and it's deeply integrated into the world that surrounds us. There is spiritual answers to our present crisis. How can we harness the knowledge of technology, our vast wealth and resources to reshape society and our planet? Must we reshape our worldview to do so, to challenge ourselves? Humanity is born of nature, and we need to better understand the connection between science and spirituality. We need to graduate from this concept of self-development on an individual scale to a collective human evolution, an emerging global consciousness.
Well, our mission here has always been to reclaim, in whatever way we can, this core wisdom of humanity. And the more we work with this, with our wisdom of our earliest ancestors and what we can read from it, it's become evident that it's really the wisdom of the stars. It's the wisdom of evolution on the grandest scale, of which we're just a drop in the ocean. It's life's rule book that we must follow, we must return to. These inherent dynamics that have guided so successfully for the last few 100,000 years our species, these same core values and principles that guide all of life. That's where we must return if we're going to last a few 100,000 more. And I think of this pandemic as Mother Earth, as Mother Nature saying, children, go to your room and think long and hard about what you have done. Yes, we have set our house on fire and it's melting, along with this cushy perch that we've so long enjoyed for the last 10,000 years as king of the food chain. And by the way, how did we even get there? On our own, we are rather poor creatures. If you take away our brain power and those opposable thumbs, we're small and soft and needy and vulnerable and relatively defenseless on our own. But through our technology, through our culture, we have thoroughly remodeled our world to suit our own needs and comfort. We have powered our way through. We've outsmarted, at least for the time being, many of nature's checks and balances to not only survive, but to thrive. But we've done so at the expense of everything else around us. To quote a native elder, we who have made a temple of our intellects have forgotten how to listen to the wisdom of the trees, the sky, the waters, of Mother Earth, our souls, our earliest ancestors. They survived while viewing everything around them as sacred. Well, the party's over. It's time to clean up the mess and to grow up. It's time to rethink and reset and to accelerate this shift of paradigm that has long been underway. Today we might ask, as the fight heats up over Earth's remaining resources, what are humanity's best and most precious resources? What can we bring to the table in solving this? What is Classroom Earth demanding of us? Our guests today have long been answering just that for many decades. They are pioneers in visioneering a new paradigm, as well as friends and colleagues on this shared mission. Hazel Henderson, futurist, evolutionary economist, syndicated columnist, consultant on sustainable development, author of 9 books, among them Ethical Markets, Growing the Green Economy, The Power of Yin, Celebrating Female Consciousness, Politics of the Solar Age, Building a Win-Win World, Life Beyond Global Economic Warfare, Paradigms in Progress, Life Beyond Economics. And Hazel wrote the foreword to our co-guests today, William Halal's new book, Beyond Knowledge, How Technology is Driving an Age of Consciousness. Bill Halal has worn many hats: major in the U.S. Air Force, aerospace engineer on the Apollo program, Silicon Valley business manager, and today as professor emeritus of management, technology, and innovation at George Washington University. As founder of the TechCast project, his forecast of trends that drive change, of breakthroughs in emerging technology, of the innovation, the social trends, and the wild cards. I want to hear about those wild cards. They both are forces in this, leading voices in this challenge ahead of us, laying out the roadmap. Hello and welcome to you both. Good to have you here.
We had to edit down your
Thank
credentials
you.
because
Thank
we
you
needed
so
like
much.
20 minutes.
Indeed.
I want to say this setting is just perfect. I mean, your everything you said is exactly right. It's exactly what I've been working and thinking about. So it's good to be here.
Thank you. Good to have you here. And it's good to know that it's a shared mission, that the paradigm shift is heating up, that it is fully underway. And Hazel, I have to start with you to say, 40 years ago, you were a lone voice in the wilderness calling for this. Where did the vision come to you? And how far have we come? I know.
Well, I grew up.
Is there hope? Yeah.
I grew up in England, that green and pleasant land, and I fell in love with nature as a child, picking bluebells in the woods. And in those days, children were allowed to, we were always just told by my mother, run about and play, go outside. So if children have that opportunity, they fall in love with nature. That's certainly what happened to me. And so basically, it was as simple as that. And I think that when I came to the US and arrived in New York City in the 1960s and became a US citizen in 1963, I remember thinking how incredibly powerful it was that I was a citizen of this wonderful country that despite all of the things we're talking about now and, discussing the things we need to discuss about the faults in the past and everything else, we immigrants, we believe that this is a noble experiment in this country. And the fact that from all over the world, people still want to come here, that they believe in the American experiment in democracy. And it's very powerful to me. I mean, it's immigrants like me that tear up on the 4th of July. We really believe in the vision, in the wonderful American experiment. So here I am, I arrive in New York City and I see all this smog. And for one reason or another, I realized that this was very similar to what happened in Britain in 1952. There was a huge smog in London.
And people died. Yeah.
Yes, and 4,000 people died in 1 week. And it was because we were producing our energy, our electricity from coal. And I saw the same thing happening in New York. And so being an American citizen and feeling so powerful, I got together with the mothers in the play park and we started a group called Citizens for Clean Air. And of course, now 40 years later, almost 50 years later, no, more than that, suddenly people realize now that air pollution kills 9 million people in cities all over the world
Wow.
every year. And so suddenly it's another one of the planet is teaching us directly, you know.
Our planet is our
So
programmed learning environment, you say. So, and feeding us the need to mature. And Bill, you say that seeing and assessing our technologies are the latest tools of consciousness. So the very technology that got us in this mess, you're saying will lead us out. What hope do we have to see that?
Well, I think the key is to have faith in the process of social evolution. That's really what my book is about. It's not really about consciousness itself, although it touches on consciousness. It's really social evolution. Social evolution is driving us into a new stage of development. We've been in a knowledge age for 2 decades, but that's exhausted itself. We have all the knowledge we need. The smartphone gives everybody in the world access to all the world's knowledge. So the knowledge age has been a great success, but it's spawned this enormous wave of disinformation and controversy and conflict through social media. It reminds me of what happened when the printing press was invented 600 years ago. It created decades of war and conflict and the Protestant Reformation. And that's what's happening now. I think all of this knowledge is so unsettling. People don't know what to make of it. And I think the key is to see that social evolution has its own logic. It will see us through because we are now entering an age of consciousness. I like to say that it's here now. It's just not what we expected. We expected consciousness to be benign, enlightenment, but it's not turning out that way. It's very disturbing.
It's almost as though that technology has allowed our worst selves to profligate. And,
that's right.
and that's what we're sharing right now. So what is it going to take? I mean, Hazel, imagine if you'd had your smartphone back on that playground setting, what you could have done then. So technology is offering us the chance to get the word out and to move the dial on the dialogue for all of this. But it's working.
Let me go back to where Bill and I connected. And we connected back in the World Future Society many, many years ago. And I had morphed by that time into a cabinet level science advisor for the US Office of Technology Assessment. And basically, we both had the same understanding, of the evolution of technology. But for me, the work I did at the Office of Technology Assessment, which was very, very controversial, and it was shut down by the Republicans in 1996 because our studies were simply too good. They're all available now. So we were always looking at what were the future consequences of these technological innovations, mostly driven for profit purposes by private companies. And today, you just mentioned the smartphone. And today, we all had these wonderful visions of what the internet was going to be, with Tim Berners-Lee and the early dream that it would be a global village. And because we never really looked at the possibilities that the consciousness of the 3 billion people, for example, who are on Facebook, is at an adolescent level. And so is that of Mark Zuckerberg. He's basically an adolescent. And so he has 3 billion people. And he sort of thinks it's a country, and yet it's a country without any laws, without any constitution, without any police force, without any garbage collection. Everybody can just do whatever they want. And so I have an article coming out tomorrow talking about the whole business of the need to have this kind of anticipatory look at what are the consequences of these technologies, which are driven, in the case of all of the Silicon Valley companies, they're all advertising companies, and they're driven by profit motives purely to make us feel angry and upset. That's the way their algorithms are set, and to sell our information to other advertising companies. And so I wrote an article about a year ago called Steering Our Social Media Towards Sanity, and the 5 steps that now literally number my steps 1, 2, and 3 are actually happening now at the legislative level, both in the US and in Europe. So we are catching up. So there's an example of immature people with immature goals creating a terrible mess unless we expand the consciousness of the population.
So it's like the genie is out of the bottle, and how do you prevent him from? I mean, we're gobbling up the Earth's resources left and right, but we're also gobbling up our own mental sphere as well. There's such push-pull, these dynamics that are at work on us, we don't even realize that you've just outlined. So how do we?
Yes, I mean, my point in this article coming out tomorrow is that we're actually driving ourselves crazy. And the reason goes back to our physics lessons when we were in school. And that is that we know that in the information age, all of these technologies of social media and on the internet are traveling their information. That's what the information age is about. They travel at the speed of light. For example, all of the false information about vaccines travels around the world on Facebook at the speed of light. And yet we humans are still incarnated on this physical earth and bound by the laws of thermodynamics. And our hearts can only beat so fast, and our legs can only go so far. And it still takes 365 days for our planet to circle our mother star, the sun. And so you see, we have this huge mismatch. And what's happening now is that too many people in executive situations are saying, oh, we must catch up. We have to somehow catch up. We've got to retrain ourselves. We've got to jump back on this train.
Okay.
And yet 4 million people in the US last month just decided to get off the grid. They quit. They didn't want to be in this rat race anymore. And that is a sensible decision. So these are the issues about consciousness that we need to talk about today.
And the noosphere, Bill, you open your book by saying the noosphere of Teilhard de Chardin, this vision of global consciousness in the 1950s that he's first formulated, it's already here in a technological sense. You cite statistics to join Hazel on what are we dealing with?
Right.
How is it here? It's not quite what Teilhard envisioned either.
Well, Teilhard knew that it would be contentious. He knew that. He knew it would take some time to resolve the conflict, but he envisioned the final goal would be what he called Omega Point, and that was when the differences were resolved and synthesized. And I think that will happen. I think my study of social evolution tells me that this is a life cycle for the planet. It's not just random behavior. It has very precise direction. If you want to go to the synopsis of my book at beyondknowledge.org, you'll see this wonderful graph of the life cycle of evolution. It's the only graph that I know of that plots the rise of civilization with actual data and actual scales. And it shows that the life has evolved in a very precise life cycle. It's organic. And we are reaching the end of that life cycle in consciousness. We're entering consciousness now. That's what the post-factual nonsense is about. And so the culmination is at hand. It's going to take maybe a few decades to resolve this, but I think it'll happen because it's part of the natural process of social evolution. In fact, I think the 2024 elections in this country are going to be a moment of truth, and the climate problem will be more severe by then. And I think Americans will face this very critical choice. Do they want more nonsense, or are they ready to grow up and become a responsible nation? And my hope is that Americans will choose the latter, that they will finally rid themselves of this mass hysteria that's been going on for 5 years now. So I think the next few years are going to be very critical.
You know, I appreciate your comment that we are following a life cycle, that we are just part of nature. We're never going to get outside of nature. It's governing the technology that we build in imitation of nature, this life cycle. We've looked at cymatics, where you can put tones up and see a visual representation of the patterns that it makes. And when you change tones, chaos ensues until it settles into the new pattern. So the lesson from that is there's going to be some chaos while you unravel one system or one worldview or one dynamic and then move into the other. I don't know that we could avoid it or do it any more smoothly, but I think the light at the end of the tunnel is very important to keep in mind. And we were talking with Hazel before about life can kick us in the butt, as she points, on an individual level, but it's also doing so on a collective level. That also is the dynamic of learning. We change when it gets more comfortable to actually make the change than to stay the same. Yeah. So maybe things have to heat up to really motivate us. That's also a dynamic.
Yeah, well, an example, at COP26, the climate conference in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, there was, for the first time, a lot of my colleagues in the financial community, you know, basically what my company does is really engage the financial community directly, because they are really the source now of what I call the money meme, you know, where the story of money has really caught on to the point where it's very dysfunctional. So all of these financiers came, and Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, announced that the financial community had $130 trillion that it was going to commit to climate change. And I had been writing, and I was on a program on Reuters commenting on this, that the truth of the matter is that they all should be saying out loud is that there is no shortage of money. Governments print it. That's what they do. Their central banks print the money out of thin air to facilitate the activities that go on in their countries. I mean, John Maynard Keynes said this very, very clearly in the 1930s. And so basically what they should have been saying, instead of huffing and puffing and saying, well, you know, we're going to do this trading of carbon, setting up carbon markets and all that nonsense, and trading offsets and all this rubbish. What they really should have been saying is, well, there's no reason why our central banks in every rich country couldn't just, instead of doing quantitative easing, which is basically the money printing process where they buy dud mortgages and create money that way, they could very easily issue green quantitative easing, you know, buying green bonds and buying the bonds of good green companies. And the other thing that they could have said is that the IMF level, they could have copied what Kristalina Georgieva, the new president of the IMF, did, all against the old orthodoxy. She, instead of giving loans, she gave out grants, huge grants, to all of the developing countries for COVID, for vaccines. She could do exactly the same thing and have green special drawing rights. So see, that's the kind of truth we need. We need to expel some of the old myths about money, which is nothing to do with wealth. You know, money's just information that we happen to use to track and score the games that we play. And so that's my thing these days, you know, is that we have to start telling the truth to each other.
We have to ask, how can we afford it? That has to change to how can we not afford it?
Right.
Can I follow up on Hazel's point about the finances and the role of money? I think one of the most powerful things that's happened in just 2 years ago was the decision by the Business Roundtable to end shareholder supremacy. That is the focus on profits for corporations, and to accept the legitimate role of the interests of all stakeholders, employees, customers, governments, and so forth. That is truly historic. I won a very important prize a number of years ago for my paper, Beyond the Profit Motive, where I laid out the emerging model of the corporation as a socio-economic system that's really quasi-democratic, where all of the stakeholders are participants in the governance of business, and they all share the rewards and the responsibilities. And I think it's almost here. It's not quite here. They're calling it ESG, which is a mild form of this, but the principle, I think, has been established. And if we can realize the potential of this, the corporation could become a model of cooperation, which would change the culture of nations and the world, really. That could be historic. It could just change this consciousness if the corporations really follow through with the possibilities before them and make good on what they can do. That would change consciousness right there. In fact, I think the focus really should be on institutions, because that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. The corporation, governments, religions, education, all of these institutions have to be transformed into a different model that would represent a global consciousness, and that would make this realistic.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's not
Yes,
just
I mean,
the
thing is that-
stakeholders of it's all of us are the stakeholders. All of the citizens of the
Yes.
planet, the ecosystem, all the animals, life on the planet are the stakeholders. Hazel?
That's right.
Yes, I mean, cooperation is the only way forward. I mean, you just look at our true situation and realize we are all in the same boat. There's no point asking anyone which end of the boat is sinking.
Exactly.
And, you know, the thing is that we're getting it out of the mouths of our beloved children. I mean, Greta Thunberg, speaking at the UN, said, stop with the fairy tales of GDP growth. This is out of the mouths of a 17-year-old. It's so clear. And so the thing is that there are a lot of financial interests that are going to be hurt. And this is why they are trying to slow down the green transition. And I was talking to a group of asset managers of big pension funds, you know, that probably have your 401k or something like that. And I was saying, you know, could you open up the algorithm? You see, all of these trades now are done by computer. They just push the buttons. And I said, could you open up your algorithm and see if some of the assumptions headed, you know, in there underneath all the fancy mathematics are actually obsolete? For example, are you still characterizing your fossil reserves as fuel? Or couldn't you just change it and say, no, they're feedstock and they can stay in the earth? Because it's just that we don't want them to burn it. You know, carbon, we're all made of carbon. Carbon is very useful. It's just that we don't want them to burn it. And you know what the answer is? They say, oh, that's above my pay grade. These are people that are managing your 401k. They may have billions under management. And they're saying, no, I get my bonus from just pushing the buttons. See, that has to stop.
So this economic equation that is so askew and so out of balance, Hazel, I interviewed you on radio in the 1990s, and something you said then has stuck with me for a long time. You said, why do we not value a tree? when it is living in the forest, providing an ecosystem, recreation, biodiversity, oxygen? Why do we not value a living tree? It's only when we cut it down and sell it off that we put an economic value to it. And so this worldview, we're all about the worldview needs to shift. We're about moving the dial through the dialogue and re-examining our worldview. And the economics and the technology, these big drivers for recreating the world, the new story, telling ourselves the new story. We can't do that until we get the new story in place, until we all are agreed. What's the mission here? What are we all about? Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? And what are we really doing here? So this paradigm shift. It is back to consciousness, Bill. You are right about your cover of your book. You have a beautiful young woman representing the goddess, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
and the younger generation,
Yeah.
who it will be fully in their hands if they can embrace those qualities. You talked about love, Hazel, earlier on. You talked about the feminine wisdom, the feminine divine. We used to have that goddess in place, and she got pushed aside. Everything used to be sacred, and we devalued ourselves along with everything else. And women and what we bring to the table. We've got to rebalance the story and the equation. So how do we get there?
Well, the good news, I think, is that the pandemic has made it clear to, I think, almost everybody that the present system doesn't work. I think there's widespread agreement on that. That is a big accomplishment right there. And so people are looking for the new paradigm. I think there's a receptivity to it. And people like Hazel and I are trying to articulate what the new paradigm is. So hopefully there's an audience out there, and hopefully they will hear this. I think we should start talking about global consciousness in a real serious way, in a precise way. What does it really mean? And I would imagine that if we could do this well, we could hold workshops around the world on helping people understand this process of social evolution, where we're going as a planet, and what does global consciousness really look like. That, I think, is essential to educate people on what's happening here, the things Hazel and I and you and Paul are talking about, and what's the end game? What's the vision? There is no vision for the world now. There's no vision for the United States. We're muddling through, and I don't think muddling through is going to do it. The crisis is so severe, it's existential. It's going to require massive change. It's going to require things that we haven't thought of before. And people have to learn, they have to be educated, have to think this through. So I really like the idea of something like workshops on global consciousness. I'm thinking of starting something like that.
What would be the curriculum? What is the roadmap? How do you see it?
Well,
Let's start with the dialogue.
Yeah, the curriculum would be to help them understand the trajectory of social evolution, to understand the
Where we are
path,
in the whole arc.
the path of development, the fact that we've left the knowledge age and we're entering the age of consciousness, and to appreciate the enormity of the challenge, what I call the crisis of global maturity. It's the world has to grow up, or we're not going to have a civilization. It's really that simple. And when I talk to people about this, they understand that. And they accept the fact that it's a question of how much pain are we prepared to endure before we change, before we accept the reality and actually change. So if we could explain this to people in a comfortable setting, and then have them think through what would the vision be, what kind of a world would be sustainable, and then I think it follows. And we've given a shot at that in my book, and on my website. There's a model of global consciousness that we've worked out with our TechCast experts. And I've used this with a number of groups, and they all find it very plausible, demanding, of course, but they understand that it's not fantasy, it's not utopian, it's simply what's needed to have a sustainable civilization. So it's eminently practical.
And Bill, what does it take for us to put our big boy pants on, for us to become adults? Because it seems like if you turn on current level of media, this coverage and what's going on, There's this
Yeah.
nitpicky thing going on
Yeah.
with no real discussions
Right.
happening on the level that you're bringing up. I'm inspired by the vision that you two are bringing to us today. What's it going to take for us to become the adults that
Well, how about the abyss staring us down
Well,
for
yeah.
starters?
but,
Yeah.
well,
You know, in a way, this is unpredictable because we're not in charge. As
Right.
Hazel points out, the planet's in charge,
Mm.
and social evolution has its own logic. It's working its own way. Beyond us, it will. I think we're going to be surprised. My guess is we're going to be surprised by events in this
Yes.
decade because the
wild
problem is so
cards.
dire that events are going to force change. That's my guess.
Well, I would say also
I-
that we're at the end of our interstitial warming period geologically, right? The
Right.
ice age should be returning if we look at the last 5 million years. There's a cycle. So we know that climate change is afoot, but we've just put it so far out of balance that we can't predict. We can't look at the past because the past looks very different than what our current situation is. So there's a wild card right there. We have no clue as to what the planet, where it's going. You push something out of its stasis, out of its balance, you don't know where it's going to go. This is
We need a
unprecedented.
vision. We need a vision of a sustainable world.
Yeah. Hazel?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just to pick up on the past, we have made moral progress. If we look at the past thousands of years, at the Golden Rule, if you go into Wikipedia, there's about 50 pages. And that was for centuries and centuries ago. And do as you would be done by. That was the first thing that all humans in every language, whether it was Jesus or Buddha or Confucius or Muhammad, they all subscribed to the Golden Rule, which was our first acceptance of our mutual interdependence. And then fast forward to the year 1215 in England with the Magna Carta. And out of the Magna Carta came the writ of habeas corpus, which said, guess what? The king doesn't own my body. I own my own body. That's the writ of habeas corpus. Then fast forward to the United Nations in 1948, when Eleanor Roosevelt, with her leadership, got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then we made more progress. I was very involved in the Earth Charter, the 16 principles of human responsibility. No rights without responsibility. And the Earth Charter's 16 principles were launched in the Peace Palace at The Hague. I was there. And there were presidents from countries. There was Gorbachev was there, Maurice Strong was there. There was people from all over the world. And this was the first time that those 16 principles have been adopted now all over the world. If you go to earthcharter.org, and countries have signed on to them, companies have signed on to them. So we are making progress. We are moving from the adolescent stage toward maturity. And the next stage is to take love seriously.
That's
and
right.
the whole thing is that the work I found of Peterim Sorokin that I quoted in The Politics of the Solar Age 40 years ago, he wrote a book called The Ways and Powers of Love. And it has thousands of citations of case studies. He ended up as chairman of the Harvard Department of Sociology. And basically, these are all robust examples about how love applied to all kinds of situations, from peacekeeping to relationships with companies, with, at all levels. Love is simply the most effective way to deal with progress. And so cooperation and love are the two new rules of the game, and we have to start taking them seriously. And I have an article called Valuing Love Economies. And what we forget is that those ancient traditional societies that were based on the golden rule of mutual aid, that wasn't money, it was mutual aid in community with each other, sharing and caring for each other. Basically, those segments of all societies in the world are still much larger than the money and market denominated sectors, which are measured by the GDP. So we are already bigger, and we just have to claim the value of the love economies.
Back to the goddess. Yeah.
If I could follow up on Hazel's point, there are many other signs of very powerful changes underway. For instance, the United States recognition of gay marriage is historic. I was surprised. I was amazed when that happened. I think most of us were. And then the Me Too movement, where women around the world have made it clear they're not going to allow men to treat them sexually. The gay right, the Black Lives Matters movement is a global phenomenon also. Recently, nations around the world have agreed to a minimum corporate tax around the world, which is astonishing. So there are signs of progress in this direction. They're not as strong as we would like them to be, but it tells us that change will come when people are ready for it. And I think the process of social evolution is so powerful, you can't deny it. It will come. It will come when it's ready.
You know, recently having gone through the death of parents recently, it's amazing how when everything is stripped away, only love remains. So from a personal point of view, a personal story, personal evolution, we have come to these brinks where
Crossroads.
Life changes, things are taken away. It's interesting how the stripping away, only love remains. That's all you've got to fall back on a personal level. Maybe that's kind of what humanity is going to be facing. We can no longer sustain this crazy lifestyle that we have. How we've lived and enjoyed, and the party is ending. It's ending. And
That's
we
right.
only are going to survive on love. I agree with that. It's all we're going to have left. And that's what we're going to have to bring to the table.
Yeah.
Is just consciousness, is just the elements of flourishing.
I wonder if you want to hear from your members of your audience at this point.
Let's do that.
Yeah, we could take some comments and
I want to
questions.
start with Brian Tucker.
Okay.
Hi,
Brian.
Thank you. Hi, Paul, Laura. Thank you, Hazel and Bill. Such a all-encompassing presentation that you've given today. Just so many really valuable points. I want to first just ask you from an embodied point of view, because many of us come to this community with kind of a practice in mind. And one of the things we begin to recognize is the way that consciousness feels in our body in a particular sense. I'm curious from both of you how you begin to recognize in your own self where this change in consciousness, how do you recognize that you're really moving towards that evolutionary perspective, global consciousness? How does it live in your body? How does this larger, higher consciousness build that you speak of, how do you recognize, or instead of deluding yourself, how can you recognize it? What are the characteristics of it in an embodied sense?
Hazel, I'll let you take that one. That's a tough one.
I just saw somebody in the chat reminded me of Genevieve Vaughan.
Yes.
And there was a woman who was writing about the gift, and that the whole, what I'm talking about with the love economies is they're all gift economies. And we're constantly exchanging gifts with each other. And see, there's nothing wrong with money or markets. They were wonderful inventions that humans have been using for thousands of years. As has been pointed out in books on ancient economies. For example, in the in the Pacific Islands, the people in those islands traveled between the islands in canoes, exchanging gifts that relatively were valued in those different islands. And the money they used was shells. Or in the North America, the Native American peoples have traded all over North America using wampum, feathers, shells, whatever. And so we mustn't allow markets and money to be weaponized and turned into an overall metric. And that's what happened. Basically, they got, of course, the math is much easier if you can say, okay, we have just one metric here, and it's money. And so the GDP and all of the metrics that are driving us over the cliff are just too easy. And I co-sponsored a conference in Curitiba, Brazil, in 2003, called the First International Conference on Implementing Indicators of Quality of Life and Sustainability. And we had over 700 statisticians of health, education, quality of life, environment, and they all came out of the woodwork all over the world and came to Curitiba, Brazil, hugging each other, saying, oh my God, somebody's realized that there's other ways of measuring our progress and consciousness than using money. Let's
And our
use
value,
the
our
actual
worth.
science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Measure our worth with, a new rules measure.
Well, you know, my answer to Brian is that living without love is terrible. It's painful. It's depleting. To get into arguments with people is destructive. It's a terrible way to live. I was reminded of that when my first wife died recently, and it brought back all the memories, the horrible memories of that marriage, the failures of that marriage. And it forced me to realize that love is just, as others have been saying here, it's really the basis of life. And I learned that from the failure of that marriage profoundly. And boy, I treat my wife differently now. I show her affection, and I try to treat everybody with love because it's a better way to live. It's more comfortable, it's healthier, it's opening, it avoids the stress of conflict. So I think the things that Hazel and Laura and Paul are talking about are eminently real. They're practical. It's just a better way to live. And I see it all around me. I see people that they don't want to argue. They don't want to fight. Yeah. But that's lost on a lot of people. Somehow that message has to be conveyed. I think one of the best things we could do, in fact, with the people who in this country, in the United States, who are subscribed to all the post-factual nonsense, is just listen to them. I know it'd be hard to do, but these people are not going to go away. The 70-some million people who voted Trump, they're not going to go away. And I think we should just listen to them. I think that's the only way this is going to be disbanded, by listening to what they have to say, hearing them through, finding the points that are valid in what they have to say, and make it clear that they are being listened to. That's the only way this is going to be resolved. It's not going to be resolved with more battles. The dumbest thing we do now, I think, is to think that politics should be a battle. That's the most terrible way to develop policy I can imagine.
Right.
I could envision reaching a point where politicians who can get both sides to cooperate will be more powerful because they can provide solutions to all parties. I can envision that happening.
Answer that question personally now, thanks to Bill. And my personal experience of all of this was growing up in a typical patriarchal household, full of fear and dread, with a very violent father. Oh. And he tyrannized my mother and used to hit her around and everything like that. And basically, he made her grovel for every penny that she used to buy the groceries. And we used to always have these fights every Friday night where my mother would have to present him with the grocery bill, which she'd gotten the grocer to give her the, and that would get him off on all of the usual. And so I and my sister would hide behind the sofa, and we would say to my mother, let's run away. And she said, I don't have any money, darlings. And so we would say, well, let's call the police. No, nobody must know about this. His house is his castle. You see, and so I learned at a very early age that I bet to get to the bottom of this money thing and find out about how money was used to control people. And basically in all societies today, money is controlling people far more than anything else. So money and the scarcity, they keep money scarce, as my friend Grace Leclerc just put in on the chat box. The whole idea is to keep the money scarce and keep us running on the treadmill. So that's why we have to unpack the money meme. And there is a 1-hour television special, which is free on our website, ethicalmarkets.tv, on demand. It's been on all of the PBS stations over the past 10 years, and it's called The Money Fix. And it's all about the politics of money creation and credit allocation. We have to get to the bottom of the money game.
It's interesting how the self-help movement for the last 20, 30 years has really helped so much of us to get out of those cycles on a personal level. So maybe that was the first step to helping us get out of it on a collective level. And so I would assume that that's part of your progression of evolution.
Right, absolutely.
Heal yourself, put oxygen to self. And I will also say that to see the world as sacred is to, as you point out, Brian, to be embodied by feeling that energy flow of love with all of creation. To have those, I say the mystical moments are a necessary part of this to actually get all that flowing and that embodied sense of that connection to the cosmos, to the larger sphere. That's just simply the definition, to step outside ourselves, to transcend, to embrace something larger than ourselves.
Thank you. You both, Hazel and Bill and Laura, you seem to be affirming that impulse of love that we feel is in line with that evolutionary impulse. And so often it seems that our society teaches that out of us. So it's good to hear your affirmation that's an instinct that can be trusted.
And your own answer to that, Brian? Let's hear your answer.
Well, no, it's nothing more than I think what you've already spoken. The various ways that the technology is of consciousness that you refer to, Bill, and the many practices of the world religions all seem to be interested in us embodying this instinct and expressing it in the world in a purer and purer manner. But I think the time we live in right now is rather dangerous because there are so many ways we can confuse that impulse, and we need to gain some greater clarity and direct it properly for the benefit of community and for the world, for the earth. So thank you. Thank you for your perspective.
Yeah,
Well
thank
said.
you. And hello, Joseph. So,
Yeah.
so,
Well,
who's next?
Tony is up.
Appreciate that.
Tony Hull. Here you are, Tony.
Hi. Yes. Thank you. I just caught several things together, and I wanted to see how you talk about it. We started out talking about social media and the great entropy that's created at the speed of light, and the information, misinformation, opinion, exactly the dialogue of having exactly the opposite of having dialogue. And I keep on thinking that is really necessary. I loved how you said, listen, Bill, that was right. And I like the way Brian just talked to clarity. But one of the problems I see now is that perhaps through our education, how people are educated now, we tend to take sides immediately rather than go to critical thinking, to look at things. And and it's rare that a dialogue doesn't improve a situation. So I keep on looking for that, and I wonder if you'd comment on that. Also, an analogy I heard a year or so ago at the onset of COVID was, will our world continue with us in tribes, or will we be in a hive all working towards a common good? And I like that analogy. But I wonder if you would talk a little bit more about some of the power brokers are the Silicon Valley companies, and where do they vote, and how are they pushing things? It's all very strange.
Yeah.
Bill?
Comments, Bill or Hazel?
Well, Brian reminded me of a key point that I've articulated, and that is, in an age of consciousness, we need technologies of consciousness, things that help shape our consciousness.
Right.
And we do this as a normal part of life. We just don't think of it that way. You wake up in the morning, you take coffee to pick you up. At night, you have a glass of wine to calm you down.
Right.
So I've developed that concept, and my book Beyond Knowledge has a whole chapter devoted to technologies of consciousness, things that we can do increasingly to shape our consciousness, and that we have to think in those terms. I think just the way we for the last 20 years we've been thinking about information technologies to shape our world of knowledge. And there are all kinds of things we could do. If we could structure, for instance, I'd like to see the media get away from this habit they have, bringing two opponents on air and having them engage in a battle. That doesn't accomplish much at all. I'd like to see them bring people together and see if they can articulate a understanding of their different points of view and reach some kind of a compromise. That would be instructive. That would be really powerful. That would change the tone of society.
Of course, one thing that happened a few decades ago, the fairness doctrine was taken away, and this means that the news media is now regarded to be entertainment, not giving true information.
Yeah.
And that creates something that's difficult. It's much more
Right.
It's much more salable to have two people screaming at each other,
Right.
two people in a dialogue.
Right. And that also means that social media has to be regulated. I mean, there's no avoiding that. It's a public utility.
I mean, that's totally out of control.
It's out of control, exactly.
But how do you regulate it?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of things that could be done. I don't think we should get into details. You could just measure the amount of disinformation on each platform and penalize them for that amount of disinformation and make it transparent so that you know where the disinformation lies. But we could do it. We just need the political will to do these things.
Yeah.
I like how Buckminster Fuller so long ago talked about livingry versus weaponry, and how technology, I mean, you wonder about the first use of technology, and you wonder about why so much of our wealth devoted to mass destruction type of weapons. When are we going to make it support life? We say that we can't afford to do it, but look where we're spending the money, what we're doing. If we could stop that battle, then we could put some of those resources to solving a new infrastructure of livingry. So,
and coming back to this concept of technology of consciousness, this idea that down throughout history there's been some sort of a meditation or some kind of a community tribal celebration or ritual that compels people to step outside of their own individuality and to see the greater good. Like you were bringing up, William, and following up on the comments of earlier with.
Well, look at William Shatner, you pointed out,
Right.
Bill, his reaction to being up in space, looking back down on Earth, similar to Buckminster Fuller was the first one to take the photograph of Earth from space and say, spaceship Earth, blue dot,
Well, that's
one boat, we're all in one boat.
That's a consciousness raising technique that we don't all have access to, but it's great that you get to step off the planet and look back at the planet, and your world changes, and you never come back in the same individuality you had previously. But again,
On the same token, though, this race for space to colonize Mars and the moon, good luck. And deer and parks running around. We have it on Earth. Let's fix the Earth first.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that, Bill? This race.
I heard a wonderful colleague of mine give a talk, and I was shocked when he talked about the Earth becoming uninhabitable and forcing us to go to Mars and other planets. That is the dumbest idea imaginable.
Thank you.
And I was going to say, before we hang up on Tony, being an astrophysicist, Tony, what do you think about moving to another planet?
Well, I think it's pretty far-fetched.
Yeah.
Mars is a really nasty place, and the Earth and Moon is very difficult too.
Yeah.
If we ever sent people to Mars, they would lose their bone strength and could never return to Earth. There would not be protection against radiation. There would be all sorts of terrible things. So they would be like the space dog the Russians shot up. There'd be no hope for those who went there.
And besides, if the Earth became uninhabitable, you wouldn't have the capability to leave this planet and go to other planets, because you just wouldn't even have a scientific community. The whole system would collapse.
Absolutely, we'd have chaos. And
Right.
yes.
It's really a stupid idea.
Thank you.
I'm shocked that some people think in those terms. It's really shocking.
Well, it has public imagination. We have several presidents that have proclaimed we're going to go to Mars, send people to Mars and stuff like that, like Kennedy, back when we sent people in the Apollo program. Yeah, you can go to the moon and you can stay for a few days and come back. Mars, it's a little more difficult to come back.
But you know, there's a saving grace in space travel. If Shatner is I'm sorry, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Yeah, so I'm totally agreeing with you. We have to look at the world differently. I think this is part of communication. And again, I really liked how you said, why don't we get people together and have them communicate?
Yeah.
And like right now, I find it ludicrous that people from the Trump administration are not allowed on campuses like Berkeley or Harvard. They're blocked. They can't go. When I went to college, I had the privilege of my freshman year of sitting in front of Malcolm X. And it was so amazing for a boy brought up in a New England town, all of a sudden to hear this other perspective. And this is the way eyes are opened, the way we learn, the way we communicate, and maybe even the way we ultimately love.
It's how we respect and love each other as we hear each other. Right?
Can I jump in for a minute?
Yes, please, Hazel, and thank you, Tony.
Yeah. On a couple of these points. First of all, in 1991, in my book, Paradigms in Progress, I had, I guess, it was the first computerized picture of all the space junk around the planet, carelessly, been thrown away. And I pointed out that if we went on accumulating space junk at that level, and which we have been doing, of course, for the last 30 years since then, we would have created a prison. And we would not be able to ever go to Mars or anywhere else. And now we're spending billions trying to figure out how to try to clear enough of the space junk so that the greedy billionaires who are obviously adolescents, are talking about going to Mars. And I'm conducting an experiment right now with a group of my financial friends. And it's basically asking them to look at the issue going on between the two world superpowers, China and the United States, that will govern the planet for the rest of this century. And are we going to have a conflict with them? Or the point I was making is that both of those societies, and I've been an old China hand, I've been going to China since 1986. I was invited there by the state council who had invited the Tofflers, and they loved Future Shock. And so they said, well, are there any other futurists in the US? And the Tofflers said to invite me. So that was how I got to China. I've been going there ever since. And so I'm looking now at the dialogue that's going on between the two cultures, USA and China, about how to restrain the greedy billionaires. They have their greedy billionaires and we have our greedy billionaires. Now, in our cultural milieu, we try to bribe them, give them more money incentives because, we live by the money meme. And the Chinese take a different approach, like with Jack Ma. They just say, well, no, actually, you're not going to have an IPO with Ant. Sorry about that. And we want you to give more money to charity. And we don't want these social media companies to have more time on children's screens. So they're limiting the screen time now. And they're saying that social media companies can't be constantly advertising junk. And so their second richest guy, Mr. Hui of Evergrande, the big real estate company, they said to him, okay, the new rule is that housing is for living and not for speculating. So that's the new rule. See, so they do it by simply promulgating rules. And instead of having elections and the kind of debates that we have on TV where two people go at each other and nothing happens, instead they do massive amounts of polling, and they constantly check to see what kind of consensus is around these ideas. And they have been polling all of these ideas about restraining social media. And guess what? They're very popular. And just like they're very popular in the US, you see? So there's all kinds of ways that we can cooperate with the Chinese. And this is a particular mission of mine right now because I'm so familiar with both cultures.
It reminds me that when you have an elephant herd and then the poachers come in and they kill the biggest ones and the matriarchs, the young bulls run amok. So it kind of reminds me that, we need mom to come back.
We need elders.
And guide the hell. Yeah, we need the elders to come back and kind of govern things. And that's what these tribal societies had. So it's really not a good comparison of tribes versus hives. The tribes had their 7-generation mindset in place. The tribes had the women council and the men council, women's business, men's business. They had governing. They had taboos.
Right.
They had checks and balances in place, and we've just removed them all. So this is what we get. Yeah. So how do you put them back in place? What makes sense?
I'm sorry to interrupt. So how do you participate as an individual sitting and watching your evening news or reading a newspaper or being a part of the social media thing, and you see all this going on and you say, what can I do about what's happening with the planet and the environment and this and that? And it's, yes, some people choose the protesting avenue or they do this or that, but there's something deeper and more profound that needs to happen. And it's that shift of consciousness that you're referring to that I think that maybe holds a key that if we can somehow bring about the change in perspective, which happens on the level of consciousness, that we have more of an opportunity to make that shift.
And I'm very happy that the world leaders are listening to you both.
Yeah,
that your letter of the tech goes out. Here's the latest, and that your counsel, Hazel.
Make a comment on a side note. This week we booked when we were confirming with Hazel. She's going from one conference to another and one phone call to another, and she's got 16 things going on at once. And people half her age just sitting around looking for something to do, and she's doing something now.
Running circles around everyone, according to your assistant. Yes,
exactly. And I think Grace had her hand up, and I would get Grace.
Oh, I want to hear Grace.
Have Grace add to the conversation.
Thank you. I accidentally put my hand up, but I did have something to say. I was involved with Hazel in the early 80s in the beginnings of the large-scale socially responsible investing movement that's now evolved quite a bit. And I had the chance to do a lot of the press work during that period of time. And one of the most productive series of conversations that I had was with the mainstream media, with particularly with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. We had a whole series of conversations about money and love and the fact that they can work together. And this was a hugely shocking idea, but very compelling to the people that I talked with at both of those places who cover economics. There's a desire, I think, even within these mainstream platforms to have a kind of a healing. because this segregation between and the idea of money as something that can't be connected to love is just a construct of our economic system and the basis of scarcity. So the other thing I wanted to say is that one of the things I've been doing right now as a way to connect to more like mainstream people is I'm doing contact tracing in Missouri. And so I'm talking to people in Missouri, you know, a number of hours a week who have COVID or somebody in their household has COVID. And a lot of people are saying, I'll never get vaccinated. And I'm beginning to, just by listening and not trying to debate about this, I'm beginning to see there's an emotional, visceral reality that we need to come into harmony with and understanding with. We need to be able to align with people who are different from us to be able to really get what is going on, so that the important things we're talking about here don't just exist on a very thin kind of upper level of our society, like continuing the mind-body dichotomy, because the people of our country are the body of our country. And we can't talk about this like a bunch of heads. So this is a wonderful conversation. I thank you for it.
Yeah, Grace.
Thank you, Grace.
Hazel, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, you know, Grace is one of the co-founders of the Calvert Group of socially responsible investment companies. And I was brought in on their advisory council and worked with Grace, my God, for 20 years, Grace. We worked together. And she was an incredible influence in this whole movement. And, you know, so it's typical of so many of my women friends and allies is that they don't demand credit. They don't want lots of recognition. They just get on with it. They get on with what needs to be done. And I just have to admire Grace. And it's so wonderful to see you again, Grace.
Yeah, thank you, Grace, for joining us, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say, Bill, you mentioned workshops around the world. Would you like to come back and in 2 hours give a workshop to us here and trot that out and just say, put us through the paces? Because
well, not in 2 hours, but another time I would. Yes, we could do that. Exactly.
yeah,
Okay.
Can we start something? Can we be part of that?
Let's talk about that, Paul and Laura. I'd love to do that very much.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.
That would be a very practical thing we could do.
That's what I'm looking for, those practical steps.
He's
to
the-
make the
he's the
transition.
practical guy.
No, because
Yeah.
the concepts and the ideas and what's going on in the planet around us, it's easy to get discouraged and give up. And so it's nice to see someone who's forging ahead and saying, let's find a step, and then let's take another step, and let's look at the big picture, but also to know what the steps are to fulfill that big picture. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd very much like to do that with you. Sure.
And then how do you...
think of it as a pilot?
Yeah,
we could build on if it's
I think you'd have a very receptive
community.
community
We'll put together.
that would be eager to do that. So,
Sure.
Indira has her hand up.
Indira.
Yeah.
The way I'm looking at it, you mentioned about meditation, Paul mentioned about meditation. I think that a systematic way to really bring your mind to lower frequency, like in theta wave, and my area is psychiatry, so I have experimented on this, and I call them mind mail. In theta wave, even Bruce Lipton, you know, he's a biologist who has done many experiments on this to change our subconscious. And this is one of the fastest way we can change ourselves, our thinking, which will have a ripple effect with purity of intention, what intentions that we are putting out. And I think that that can change the perspective. Ray Paul, I think he wrote a very fat book many years ago, Cultural Creatives. We are all cultural creatives. And what we can do collectively, just put aside 2 minutes in theta wave, reducing the mental frequency, to come up with a kind of a way of changing something, one or two items,
Right.
going to the core. Okay, we want planetary change or, social evolution. Put aside, and we can all do that in the workshop that Bill is, excited about with us. I think that that's very quick. You think about all these successful approach like Mahatma Gandhi, with nonviolence, or Martin Luther King or Kennedy thinking certain way. All of them, they had the power of love as well as power of mind. That is one platform that is practical. It is in our bedrooms, in our living rooms. Our mind is the most powerful tool we can use in the moment as we speak. Thank you.
I agree.
Beautifully
We also
said.
talk a lot about fitness and health, right? The whole country is on a fitness craze. We cannot be truly fit and healthy unless our planet is, unless our society is, unless all of it is. It is not an individual mission. It has to be a collective mission. We have to pull all of us forward at once, I think.
Right. And
How
thank
do
you,
we do
Indira.
that? Yeah.
And she
Thank you,
referred,
Indira.
she referred to Paul Ray, who wrote the book Cultural Creatives.
Yeah.
We interviewed him back in the 90s as well as Hazel. So I want to pull that interview off, and I can
We've been
podcast
dusting off some old interviews that are still very relevant
we
and
did
posting
over-
them on our podcast.
We did over
as well.
3,000 interviews, and so we're going back through those and posting them as we go along and finding the ones that still hold.
To join the now.
So
yeah.
where do we go next?
What have we not asked that needs to be
That's a good
said
question.
here?
See?
Yeah.
I've got some thoughts.
Good.
Please.
Just to follow up a little bit on the new health approaches to consciousness, going beyond the coffee, alcohol, whatever and mindfulness. And now, as you know, there are a lot of startup companies now in psilocybin. And they are saying, well, that the only way to go now is to give people mushrooms. And this, on an individual level, I think can be very therapeutic for people. But just like too much meditation, it can be escapism. And so these technologies are very powerful and very useful, but let's assess them and look at the consequences and make sure that they just are not market-driven individual approaches, good as that may be, but we will lose what we are trying to put out here, which is that global consciousness now has to be collective. I mean, that's the meta story. The meta story, which isn't too hard to explain. I tried to explain it in The Politics of the Solar Age. It's basically what we can all agree on, and that is that we are all one species. We know that, and from the DNA, we have 2% of our DNA actually comes from Neanderthals. We loved the Neanderthals, right? And so basically, we all understand that, and we also understand now that we're interdependent with all other living species in the biosphere, because we know if we keep on extincting other species, we will join them in this sixth extinction. And we know that we live on a planet, the third from our mother star, the sun, and we know that we get photons every day, free photons. We don't need to dig in the earth for anything. We can simply use the free photons as well as plants do. And plants invented the first technology, which is photosynthesis. And that's what creates all of our food supply. And see, that's the meta story. If you can get everybody on board with that meta story, that all of the 4 million school children who follow Greta Thunberg all understand that, they viscerally understand that. So it's not hard.
I really appreciate this new story that's emerging, because it really shows us as one piece of a whole. We're not independent of nature. We are part of nature. We are a voice of nature. We have a role here. We are liaisons between nature and Earth and the cosmos. And all the really big waves, the mindfulness, it's taken a spiritual tradition and they've secularized it. That's one way to get it out there in the globe. Buddhism, they don't really talk about the spirits behind it. The microdosing, it's all about getting ahead and making my brain work better. But those traditions have always been about talk to the earth, talk to the cosmos, be that hollow bone and speak its wisdom, the spirit of it. So I appreciate the new story that Brian Swim and Thomas Berry were talking about, Brian Tucker and the Steep Time Network is my contact with it. But it's about a global consciousness that's evolving, that has a spirit, that is embodied spirituality. Let's put the spirit, the consciousness back on a cosmic scale. That, to me, is what the ancient peoples were talking about and connecting with. It's a consciousness larger than just the human, the consciousness larger than the self.
I'm just going to say, Hazel made the point about psychedelics. I think psychedelics is another powerful trend moving towards consciousness. More people are going to be using psychedelics, and it's going to change the way they think for the better, for the most part. It could be overdone. Hazel's exactly right, but it's another force that's raising consciousness.
And our work is about, you've got the capacity within yourself to get there.
Yeah, that was the
Without
original
outside
research of
agents.
Dr. Goodman looking at that. Yeah.
And I think the anthropologist that we work with would say not all cultures needed botanicals and plant medicine. They're beautiful, they work, they're a beautiful tradition, they've got a long, long history, but not every culture relied on them. Some of them could rely on ritual to enter into that state. Look at the sages of the ages and what they were talking about, and look at what they were doing, expanding their consciousness to pour forth that eternal wisdom. So I think it's there and very accessible to all of us.
Yeah.
So
another part of the health, the whole health movement now is very much the shift to plant-based foods and beverages, which is now growing at double-digit rates. We follow 150 startup companies growing like crazy, and it's basically driven by animal rights people around the world. And that was how I became a vegetarian 50 years ago. It was that, it was just too horrible, the thought of eating an animal. I was eating fish, but see, there is a group that we work with in Britain, and they're a consortium of animal rights people, vegans and vegetarians, and they have, last time I looked, $26 trillion of assets under management that are invested in all these new startup companies. And most of them are in Asia, because Asians, largely are vegetarians. This is a kind of, we don't understand this in the West. We're still pushing animal-based meat. And I think that's an enormous trend. And it's going to lower ambient CO2 probably as rapidly as anything else that we do. And a lot of people are making a lot of money out of it right now. And this group not only invests all these trillions in the startups in food and beverages based on plants, but they are also shorting the 16 largest meat companies, meat producers. And they're saying, look, these are stranded assets, just like fossil fuels, and you better sell these companies before you go broke.
yeah, if you haven't seen
powerful.
Cowspiracy, watch Cowspiracy.
Oh, it's a doc. I think it's on.
Yeah, and it's interesting how a lot of the food companies are saying we need to recreate, like the Impossible Burger and the whatever burger. We need to create the feel of meat. But so many friends of ours are saying, I don't need that. I want to go with just plant-based, because even all the vegan options are so glorious and fun. Don't
transitional.
disguise it.
Yeah.
Enjoy the plants and what they
Yes,
have.
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't buy Beyond Meat or Impossible Burgers because I'm not interested in meat. I eat nothing but raw salads and raw fruits and nuts, and have done for the last 50 years, you know. And so most of these companies are not about alternative meats. They are about alternative proteins.
Yeah, but I think the impossible, I think that's a really big step in the whole process. You can't just expect people to give up meat entirely, give a meat-like plant substitute first on the way there. So I think it's serving a really important role. But if the true cost of that hamburger on your plate was known, we would be converting a lot faster.
Yeah.
If, as you say, Bill, when you convert the real cost of what the old school corporations are doing, the real human cost, the environmental cost, the justice cost, all those costs, we would have converted a long time ago. So we need to put that, if you want to talk about an economic reform, it would be put the true cost out front and center. Even Buckminster Fuller was saying, when we manufacture a product, this was decades ago. What if we had done that decades ago? What if that was mandated? And if we put in the price of purchase the cost of recycling, then that would have happened. Yeah, we wouldn't be such a throwaway society. We wouldn't be having one-night stands with our resources.
One night stands with our resources. Good quote. I like that. Bill, do you want to?
So how do we get the economic and the technological in sync to create the infrastructure? Right? Our president wants to rebuild our infrastructure. Isn't going to be along new lines. As third world countries go in and create their infrastructure, they're already ahead of our internet, right? They have better internet than we do in a lot of cases, right? How do we get there?
We got to watch it very carefully. And basically, we've got to throw out all the economic textbooks and shut down most of the business schools in the world, because they are still purveying all of this nonsense and all of these outdated models which allow quote unquote externalities. In other words, anything on your balance sheet that you don't want to account for, you pass the cost on to the environment or to taxpayers or to future generations. And you see, that kind of fraud is very deeply embedded in the accounting systems that we allow. And so I don't think economics, current economics, is retrievable. That's the conclusion I came to in the politics of the solar age, that we had to transcend economics and go to systems thinking, and we had to integrate all of these other scientific metrics. And that's why when I was at Calvert, and Grace DeClaire remembers this, we issued the first, the Calvert Henderson Quality of Life Indicators, and we launched them at the National Press Club in Washington in the year 2000. And we had 12 indicators of quality of life, and less than half of them were measured in money. Because, for example, if you're looking at urban air pollution, you don't measure that in money, you measure it in parts per million of junk in the air. And the same with our health indicator. It was disability adjusted life expectancy and infant mortality. And so, yes, of course, it makes the math more complicated to bring in all of these scientific metrics. But I remember what happened at the press club. There were all of these editors sitting around there listening to my presentation of this new Calvert Henderson Quality of Life Indicator. And basically, they would just completely, you know, we get the press release from the Commerce Department of the GVP, and we just mark it up and put it on the wire. You see, they never think about, well, what does that mean?
And the wild cards, where do the wild cards come in to really push this along? Either to slam it to the ground or to uplift it? What wild cards, Bill, do you see
Oh, here,
on the
let me
horizon?
go. If this country could embrace the idea of democratic enterprise, we could change the world. We could lead the world in charting a new path. And America would be the logical country to do this because we invented modern democracy. It could take on, I think, it could be accepted in this country with the right leadership. And I can't think of anything that have a greater impact than the United States leading the world in promoting a different form of economics.
Then the right leadership is going to be that wild card, because I'm not seeing it on both sides of the fence here.
No, the politicians are ignorant, except for what's her name, Warren. She understands.
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she understands this.
yeah, she
Maybe a
knows.
few others, but most
Yeah.
of them are ignorant about this. But the corporate executives that have been leading this for years, really, it's always been here, but it's always been relegated to the margins.
The fringe.
Because the main business culture is focused on money. But the leading edge of business corporations, they could lead this. It would change the world. It's a very powerful idea.
Okay,
the,
but
the
every
conventional economics, basically, if we don't unpack the conventional economics, which is being driven by all of the oligarchs whose parents got rich in this country due to extracting fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And they are the ones that fund all of the business schools and all of the economics courses. They fund all of the think tanks, you know, the Washington think tanks and everything like that, because they are benefiting from this system. So the debate has begun in the Congress about the fact that this kind of obsolete economics has very, very powerful special interests behind it, who don't want to change the game. And the new economists are called modern monetary theorists. And the best one to read is Stephanie Kelton, Professor Stephanie Kelton, whose book, The Deficit Myth, has laid it out very clearly. She used to be the chief economist for the Budget Committee in the Senate. And she's just telling the truth about all of this. And so it's absolutely important that if we really start investing money in green infrastructure, we have to use the new model. And basically the new model is modern monetary theory. So read that book, The Deficit Myth. And that's the debate that's going on right now between Elizabeth Warren and all of the people who know that we cannot use the old economic playbook.
You know, it's interesting to follow the shift in worldviews in various sectors. We followed a few in science,
Right.
and now we're looking at this. I didn't realize it was so needed. I mean, I realized it was needed in economics, but that those special interests, the people who succeed from this tilted playing field, have every reason to want to keep it in place, just like any other worldview. So how do you budge? How do you budge that? Does it all have to come slamming down to I hope not, a full stop? Or how do you transition? What is the motivation? How do you know, it's interesting because we outnumber the few, the elite, right? We far outnumber the elite. So, and I'm so tired with the reduce, recycle, reduce, recycle, re-up, whatever advice that's given in all the basic consumer magazines. I'm like, that's not enough. I mean, get down to the heart of things, get down to the real pivot of things, right? What is it going to take? What do we do? You have talked about a friend of yours, Hazel, that is doing their own, growing their own food, doing their own the whole green lifestyle. That takes full-time effort and dedication. You have no time left for anything else.
Mhm.
It makes sense to do the green lifestyle as a community, perhaps,
Off the grid.
as a world, but it's impossible to do it on your own. You would have every hour of your day spent doing that. That is really not viable to do it on your own. It
Yeah.
has to be.
You're
What's it
absolutely,
going to
yeah, you're
take?
absolutely right, Laura.
Yeah.
And you see that's part of the old economic textbooks. See, everything's about the individual. You mustn't see the messages of these old economic textbooks is markets good, government bad, individuals good, collective action bad. No labor unions or organizations of NGOs or anything like that. So those are the meta messages. And so, of course, it's necessary but not sufficient, to change the light bulbs and do all of that. But it's changing the production processes and the business models, which are so profitable for these special interests from the 19th and 20th century. And so the only way to do this, as far as I'm concerned, is more and more media like what we're doing right now. And the kind of media, I was on all last week with the Green Economy Coalition. And we had our annual meeting. We're the largest coalition of really groups all over the world from every sector. And basically, all of this is under the radar. The mainstream media doesn't even know all of this is going on. But basically, we need to realize that these old special interests also own the Congress. They provide all the money. And I remember Senator Dick Durbin on television one time, and he was standing in the floor of the Senate chamber, and he said, Wall Street owns this place. You see, we have to understand what we're dealing with here. And it can be overcome, but it means that we have to expand our networks and connect more with alternative media. And this is actually happening.
Yeah.
Move the dial with the dialogue. I want to ask you, Bill, punctuated equilibrium, when you look at evolutionary history, you've got stasis, then you've got sudden disruption and change, and that's when evolution happens, right? We can see it in the fossil record. Organisms respond to change, and then you find what's going to work for this new environment. Are we seeing a state where the wild cards, we could call it the drivers of punctuated equilibrium, are there on the horizon? I certainly sense that they are, but how would you define them? And is that what's going to take? It's going to take to propel us forward, or is it just a natural dynamic because so much change is afoot and the clock is ticking, right? We're almost at midnight here. Clock is ticking. What are these wild cards, and how might they really accelerate change?
That's a great question, but I don't think I have a good answer for that, Laura. It's I'm just impressed by the fact that this is really bigger than any of us.
Yeah.
This is the planet. It's social evolution with its own logic, its own timetable, and we're not in charge. It's in charge, and we're going to be surprised. We're going to see things happen, I think, just the way we have in the last few years. So hold on, it's going to be a rough ride, and the pain is going to increase. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
What was that old saying that Buckminster Fuller said, I think, that it's not that the planet's at risk, it's humanity, that the planet will continue. It will regenerate itself. Whether or not how we fit into that, that's up to us.
Yeah. I think we have to listen very carefully and try and hear both. I really think we should listen to the other side. Those 70 some million, we have to listen to them. But I don't see any alternative. They're not going to go away.
Sometimes a lot's diffused just by respectful listening, right?
Yeah.
There's an art. I always used to say that I'm in the business of heavy listening, not heavy lifting. I'm a
Well,
heavy,
and
yeah.
it wasn't that many years ago. All of us here are old enough to remember that when you could definitely have
A
all
civil
the
conversation?
Yeah, sit around the dinner table with everybody from a different political party, and it was always wonderfully nice, comfortable conversation. It was not war. It wasn't like a football
Yeah.
game that they've turned it into. It was something. It was something. Just a share
Well,
of
even the
ideas.
football players pat each other on the back after the game is won and congratulate each other's.
Speaking of listening,
There's sportsmanship there.
I wonder if other people here want to
Yeah,
comment.
any other questions? Can you raise your hand using the Zoom button down below that says reactions? Okay, Tony's got a question and also.
Okay, well, it's first of all, a little bit of a comment, a discussion I had with John Mather, who's a Nobel Prize winner, about what's happening. We were sitting around his office, and John has the theory that anything we let happen will happen. And so then there's the question of how do we let things happen? And I'm thinking of states, for example, and this is a minor thing, where we have bottle redemption fees on that, and you don't see bottles all along the edge of the road. Now that's only a drop in the bucket, but are there things that we can ask our legislators to do? And my sense is that industry is when they lobby, are very sensitive to something that will give business A an advantage over business B type of thing, and vice versa. But maybe not quite so much as something that's a level playing field. I just wonder if there's a way for that. And by the way, I do appreciate Bill's return to we have to listen, because I am totally in resonance with that. So I'll step back and I'd like to hear what Brian has to say.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. I was just going to ask, particularly Hazel, you had mentioned working on the Earth Charter, and I wondered what you see as the next step for that document and how it can evolve into sort of a set of principles that have more teeth and have more ability to exact the change that it aspires towards.
It's very interesting, Brian, because at the UN conference, there was a big UN summit in Johannesburg. I'm not remembering the date, but it was on global sustainability. And it was very close that the Earth Charter was almost adopted as a UN principle to complement the Declaration of Human Rights, because there's no rights without responsibilities. And what happened was that there were too many people at that meeting who didn't want to give up control of their game, and they didn't want a newcomer, basically the Earth Charter, to have that much power. But it came very, very close. And I've been in touch with the Earth Charter the last couple of days because we're in constant communication, and I do webinars for them. And basically, they have made incredible progress at universities, and they're in all kinds of places. And I promoted them, with the companies and cities, all kinds of people have adopted the principles of the Earth Charter. But I think maybe the next thing I would like to see them do, and I haven't talked to them about this, but they should have their own television channel. They should have a global television channel, because see, the thing is that we all live in mediocrities today. Whatever kind of government we think we live under, media is what controls the game. We live in mediocrities and attention economies. I created that term, attention economies, back in 1996. And basically, that's why I founded a media company, this one in 2004, which I fund myself. We don't take advertising and we don't take outside funding. I fund it from the royalties, from our TV shows, and very capital light because it's operated out of my garage, So
And maybe we need to decentralize media like that, because the
yes,
media
you're
is
the
pretty
same,
mediocre.
Laura. See,
Yeah.
You and Paul
We
do
have a
exactly
number
the
of
same
voices.
thing. And the big thing is that if we connect up, more and more of us connect up. And so I think that we could really suggest, when they see what we do, is we have a click through on our home page to the Earth Charter. We have their logo up there on our home page, so people can click right through. So you could do that on your page, Paul and Laura. And so, let's realize that we live in mediocrities, and we can just bypass dysfunctional politicians that are, that get all of their money from the 19th century extractive industries. We don't need to play with them.
And
Just
that's
go
one of the
around
joy of our technology today, is that we can all dialogue together, right?
Yeah.
We can all talk to one another finally at last,
Absolutely.
without going through these nodes that are so controlled.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much here,
good
Brian.
point, Brian.
Yeah.
Well, we have come to the point where we need to make some conclusions and a message of hope that I hope you'll leave us with, because I think the path forward is clear. I think that the universe is taking care of it, right? I'm going to trust the universe and its dynamics, and it's been through here before. Life will find a way, as Michael Crichton would say. And I think there's a passage. It might be through the eye of a needle, but there's a passage here that's open to us. And I think that just like in life, things happen to push us in the direction that is our destiny, that is our fate. When we look back at our life, don't you think that there's another hand that has co-written our life story with us as an individual level? I find that. So many of us find that. I think maybe it's co-writing the story of humanity, and we just need to listen to it and take its wisdom, put on our big boy pants, put out the fires, right? Save one another as we try to save ourselves.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have some final thought that may be useful. I find that with my book, I'm promoting my book, and most people love it. It makes perfect sense to them. They find it assuring. But I find a large number of people, there's a population that just won't believe it. They understand that it's literally valid, but they've been so disheartened by the terrible events of the last 10 or 20 years, they can't believe anything will change. And I think what we have to do is think about the Christian principles of faith and hope. We need faith in social evolution, I think, and in human spirit, our own humanity, because these are powerful forces in the universe. And I think they will see us through. And we need to have hope. We have to believe that things can change. Otherwise, there's nothing that's going to happen, I don't think.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So that would be a good thing to remind people of, faith and hope.
Right. Could I do something that, this book of mine, The Politics of the Solar Age, which I wrote in 1981, I have a poem which is quite short. It's about 3 minutes. And it just summarizes the book. And it is, I think, a vision that is resonating now. I know I've never been so busy in my life. May I read it?
Please.
Yeah.
Okay, it's called Ode to the Solar Age. Entering the age of light, a new age of enlightenment, humans awakening to the solar age, envisioned for centuries by many peoples of the earth. Those who worship the sun saw land and fire as sacred, living with earth and winds, respecting the 4 directions. Yet hordes of strutting conquerors brought globalization and the vaunted industrial era, weaponizing ancient tools, money and markets, narrowing relationships of caring, sharing, and mutual respect, the ancient golden rule of community, mathematizing exploitation, false metrics concealing the pain, devastation of the Anthropocene age, hidden by illusions of abstraction, destruction of other lives and species marketed as progress and success. Almost finished here. The planet's wake-up call arriving in pandemics and climate catastrophes. Humans now face graduation time. Are we fit to continue on this earth? Tested now before allowing our ambition to colonize our solar system as an interplanetary species. We need first to learn our true situation, living with other species, dependent on our still hospitable planet, powered by the daily photon shower from our mother star, the sun. Learning at last from green plants, their way of harvesting those free daily photons with photosynthesis, life's primary technology, besting all human techne as mere biomimicry. Plants producing food and sustenance, inhaling our CO2 while providing us with oxygen. No need to dig deep in Earth's crust for fossil oil, coal, or minerals. Solar cells, wind turbines, geothermal and ocean energies, all stored and distributed by the lightest element, hydrogen. All provide beyond our dreams, healthy lifestyles, enough for all. No need to compete. Instead, joy in sharing and communing in all our communities, families, tribes, and nations, face to face and in cyberspace, as our beloved children are teaching. Released at last from conceptual prisons, recycling our cultures and theories, freedom from cognitive limits, academic boundaries and silos, a new age of enlightenment for all, healing ourselves and the earth, replanting, rewilding lands, rivers, and forests, fulfilling at last the promise of generations of fire and sun worshippers in this new age of light, the solar age.
You know, they
Thank you so
say
much.
that all of the, yeah,
Thank you so much. I love reading my poetry, but it's not people don't like to do it in this country. See, we Brits, we grow up with poetry.
We
Well,
love it here.
yeah, we do. They say that 99% of the electromagnetic spectrum outside of our vision is where change is going to happen. And that's where consciousness lives, right? That's where so much of our technology is heading and able to see. And I think that we just need to open our eyes and our ears also to that wider bandwidth for the solutions. And you touched on that bandwidth beautifully. That's where life happens, is where the energy flows. Wow. And there's a bigger universe for us to live in. And I think, yeah, we're getting ready to go there.
Yeah. And you know what, maybe it'd be really appropriate also, Hazel, to end with your daily mantra.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is about taking love seriously. And this daily
note to end
mantra
on.
is on my fridge and it's on every house, every room in the house. Each day I recommit myself to the almighty power of universal love and the evolutionary life force of which I am a small part. I will always be guided by this source of my eternal being and will walk in faith and hope for life on this earth and always seek those who share this knowing as my companions in love and light. I balance my energy in joy and serving my highest purpose, my universal self.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Bill, what would you tell those people who don't see hope, who are giving up?
Well, I just remind them to have faith in the universe, in evolution, and in humanity, and to have some hope. But it's very hard. If they lose that, it's hard to regain it.
Then that would be a self-fulfilling prophecy, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
this conversation has given us hope, and having you two scholars come on and take your time here on a Sunday to
Yeah.
go deep into your own work and share that with us is a tremendous gift. And I hope people have time, and we're going to, of course, make this available online as a YouTube video as well, so that people can hear your stories and your information and your knowledge and your inspiration. So I want to thank you both for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for letting us be one of the outlets for your message, and thanks for
Thank you.
keeping up the good
It was
work
my
all these
pleasure. Thank
decades.
you all so
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.